couple of minutes later, the skipper called for climbing power. One felt the mighty bomber starting to lift and raise. And just as we're coming out of the tops of the cloud, I could see it was nice and clear above. And you could see other aircraft that had gone up there before us. It was just as we came out of this cloud, here we are, flying along, slowly climbing, and another Lancaster came out and stuck his port wing into our fuselage. There was a tearing and rending of metal. Somebody called out a terrible word, Christ. We'd been hit. We had been hit all right. The other airplane fell away from us. We didn't see it anymore. Our aircraft went into a spin for 3,000 odd feet. The skipper did his best to get it out, and he did. A few minutes later, he called for the bomb doors to be opened, and we dropped our bombs, what they call safe. After this, 4 engines are still running. The skipper's still struggling to maintain control. The ailerons, those flaps you've most likely seen at the end of the wings, used for turning, have been just about disappeared. 6-foot wing tip on the starboard side had gone. And there was a big set course direct for Manston. It had informed our squadron at Bimbrook on WT, the IFFS identification friend or foe is switched on, and away we went. Well, it took a long time to get there. The tail end of the aircraft was swinging a little bit like this, and Joe here was sitting in it. My skipper did say, Dave, if you want to, he said, you can bail out. I said, what? Leave you lot on your own? No, dear, so I decided to stay. Eventually time went by and we came up to Manston. Now this was going to present another problem. We knew we couldn't use the flaps because they were possible.
There was an explosion, a vivid flash, and my aircraft was thrown onto its back. I managed to regain level flight. I assured my crew that I had control, and I checked with each of them that they were okay. I could see flames coming from the starboard wing, and so I opened up the engines to full power, hoping that an increased rush of air might extinguish them. However, as we increased speed, I felt the control column go slack in my hands, and I realized that the cables to the tailplane must have been severed. I could no longer control the aircraft, and so I ordered the crew to bail out. But at almost the same moment, the nose of our Lancaster plunged violently downwards, and the aircraft went to a vertical spinning dive. Our 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines were now driving us at very high speed, headlong towards the earth. Now the reason for this calamity, as I learned later from our rear gunner, was that the whole of the tail section of our aircraft had broken away from the fuselage. His turret was still attached to the tailplane, but he had no engines and no pilot. Fortunately, he was able to climb out of his turret and descend to earth by parachute. Because the aircraft was spinning so furiously, I was lifted out of my pilot's seat and pinned hard up against the cockpit roof with other members of my crew, 3 others as it turned out. Such was the G-force that it was impossible to move so much as my little finger, and it quickly caused me to black out, to become unconscious. Then a miracle happened. I found myself in the sky, regaining consciousness in the cold night air, and I could see my blazing aircraft close by. Instinctively, I tugged at my ripcord, and as my parachute blossomed above me, I could see that I was about to drop into the treetops, which were floodlit by my aircraft. As I landed in the trees, my aircraft crashed a short distance away. I climbed down through the branches and landed safely on a cushion of leaves. Overhead, I could hear the main force of bombers making their way home to England, and wistfully I thought of the aircrew breakfast, of eggs and bacon, a great privilege for aircrew to have eggs and bacon, and they were on their way back to England to enjoy eggs and bacon, which I wouldn't be doing for another 9 months. After the war ended, in other words. Well, an excited crowd of villagers quickly surrounded me, each and every one of them grabbing my tunic or trousers. Some of them were very, very tiny children, holding me as tightly as possible, no doubt so that each of them could claim to have captured the terror flyer, Terrorflieger, which they called me. But then I was eventually handed over to what I thought probably were sort of German home guards, but then into the hands of the Luftwaffe. And I spent 5 days and nights in solitary confinement. I was interrogated each day, which is what I expected, and I was subjected to various threats. But I stuck to the rule which had been impressed on us back in England, that we should only ever disclose name, rank and number. And this was eventually accepted by each of my interrogators. And so I spent the last 9 months of the war in a prison camp, Stalag Luft 1, on the Baltic coast, where there were 10,000 aircrew POWs from many nations: Americans, Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, South Africans, Poles, Czechs, as well, of course, as huge numbers of RAF POWs. I must at this moment pay a warm and very well-deserved tribute to the Red Cross, because on my arrival in prison camp, I was given a change of clothing and toiletries, and from September 1944 until Christmas, each POW received a Red Cross parcel every week, and that contained a variety of food, chocolate and cigarettes. The weekly Red Cross parcel was a real lifesaver. Unhappily, we received not a single parcel during the last 4 months of the war, from Christmas onwards to May. And that meant that we had to survive on the German ration. Now that consisted of 1 loaf of black bread each week per prisoner, and one bowl of thin potato soup each day. And I repeat, 1 bowl of thin potato soup. That was the daily food ration. So by the time the Russian army arrived to liberate us on May the 1st, right down in my life, May the 1st, 1945, we were really starving. Now the Russians discovered a store of Red Cross parcels, which the Germans had not issued to us. And we drew our own conclusions as to what had happened to all the parcels which the Red Cross had been delivering to our camp from Christmas onwards, and we didn't see a single one. However, the Russians issued us, each one of us, and there were 10,000 of us in the camp, 4 parcels each, 4 Red Cross parcels. So during the 2 weeks that it took to organise our return to England, every day was Christmas Day. It was fantastic. The best day of all, of course, was when I flew back to England. I was flown home in an American B-17, the famous Flying Fortress. And we landed at Ford Airfield, just along the coast from here. My greatest sorrow has been the loss of 2 members of my crew. Our bomb aimer and our mid-upper gunner, both of them are buried in the Kiel War Cemetery. That night, my squadron lost 3 Lancasters out of the 16 which had been dispatched to bomb Kiel. This was a loss rate of almost 20% in one night. It also meant 7 men in each aircraft. It also meant that the squadron lost 21 experienced pathfinders. Now, a big question for us was, how did the enemy manage to shoot us down without our having any warning? We had left the searchlights and the flag of Kiel behind us as we set course for home. But years later, I learned that German fighters were able to hone in on our H2S radar transmitter, which was fitted underneath the aircraft. I also learned that they were equipped with upward-firing cannon. Instead of attacking us from above and behind, which is the usual way, they were able to position themselves directly below us, where they were completely hidden from our view. The Germans gave this system the code name Schrager music, meaning jazz music. And I would mention at this point that they were a very powerful enemy right up until the end of the war. The remaining mystery is how 4 of us who were trapped, all unconscious, under the cockpit roof, how could we 4 of us had such a miraculous escape from certain death? Perhaps the centrifugal force, the G-force, created by this tightly spinning aircraft, caused the roof to give way under the combined weight of our 4 unconscious bodies, and to hurl all 4 of us out into the sky. We quickly regained consciousness in the cold night air, just in time to be saved by our parachutes. All 4 of us had the identical experience. After the war, the Irving Parachute Company presented me with a gold caterpillar brooch. It's a caterpillar brooch, and this is a constant reminder to me that I owe my life to the caterpillars which have spun the silk thread from which my parachute was made. So I wear my caterpillar brooch with gratitude and humility. Thank you, everyone.